while we're going to reflect partly as a result of the work that we did together, we're speaking here for ourselves, not necessarily representing only the position of this Markle report. But the fundamental gist of what we were grappling with is what will the future of employment be? What will the future of the economy be in the face of these transformative technologies? Now, you heard Brian say things like, there will be 100 million, effectively self-employed entrepreneurs around the world because of technologies like Airbnb and Uber. He also said things like, in the 21st century, an individual can be a business without being a corporation. These are sort of really interesting new ideas. And we're here really to flesh that out and to talk about some of the many ways that network technologies are changing the way we need to think about work and how we organize work in the 21st century. I think a really important point is we're not really going to predict the future. Anybody who sets out to predict the future is almost invariably wrong. But one of my guiding principles was uttered by science fiction writer William Gibson, who once said in an NPR interview, "The future is here, it's just not evenly distributed yet." So what we're really going to talk about are the things that are already happening in the present that have profound implications for the future. How that future unfolds is up to all of us and will be changing day by day. But we're going to try to unpack some of these deep changes that are already underway. So because Brian gave us such a great introduction and because so many of you were here for his session, I'm going to start with probably one of the areas that is probably least understood by asking Ping perhaps to introduce a little bit of what you do and give us a thought or two about the impact of the maker movement and basically the new kind of manufacturing technologies on the future world of work.
Okay, so I have been in 3D printing for 20 years. And I started a business to write softwares that allow you to print product rather than printing paper. And I was inspired by Chuck Hall, who actually printed the very first 3D printed part 31 years ago. Now, put in perspective, 31 years ago, Macintosh did not exist, CAD software did not exist, and we did not have internet, like connecting transfer of data. So I was inspired by this in-between space, which is how can we combine hand craftsmanship with IT technology? And that's when I got into 3D printing. You all know what 2D printing is. We know how to spread ink on a flat sheet of paper. And 3D printing does layer by layers. And instead of putting down ink, it's putting down materials. And there can be very many materials. And one of it is nylon, which is what I'm wearing. I'm wearing a 3D printed scarf, which if I knew this chair is this high, I can't quite reach it, I would have brought my 12-inch high 3D printed shoe to customize it. So 3D printing, what is very interesting, and also the maker movement, is that
3D printing, I think, intersects with the world of, say, Airbnb or Uber. It actually is an enabler for a creative marketplace in which people can design and build products. Now, here's another good example. I'm wearing one of the latest sort of Google watches. This one is designed by Samsung. But the first breakthrough product in this category, which is now being pursued by Google and Apple, the Pebble watch, was basically funded on Kickstarter, which is sort of a crowdfunding site, by some entrepreneurs who basically had an idea and had this, access now to new kinds of manufacturing technology, so they could actually build a product without having a company. They ended up going on to raise $10 million on Kickstarter, but that wasn't what they thought they were going out to raise. They just had huge oversubscription. Amazing new technology, which lets people put up an idea and say, how many people would like to help me fund this? And here's a whole new product category that came out of that. And so similarly, there are marketplaces like Etsy where somebody could say, wow, I have a 3D printer, I have an idea for a product, I can put it up for sale and start one of these 100 million small businesses that Brian talked about. You also have this incredible ability for new businesses that involve customization of products that are familiar. For example, Ping mentioned shoes. So that's really the connection of the 3D printing.
Can I touch this?
Yeah, it's really amazing. Yeah, you all kind of want to come up here and feel this sort of beautiful fabric that's made of extruded plastic. Craig, let's move down here. I know a lot of your focus has been on the future of education. I know you too, John. So you guys probably have slightly different perspectives on that. But you really can take this anywhere you want. But what do we need? What kind of skills do we need? How are we going to get them? What are some of the changes that are disrupting the path by which people enter this kind of market?
So, I mean, we had another session where we talked about the education aspects in particular. So but the relationship in my mind between the two is sort of thinking about all the aspects of work as we used to know it, and every aspect of a business, and then saying in this digital connected environment, how is each aspect of that going to be completely redefined? So you gave the example of how did financing happen for the Pebble guys.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, in the past, you either had to been in a big company like Microsoft. We tried watches, in the 90s, or you would have had to gone to venture capital in a more conventional sense. And there, people are looking at a different success metric in terms of whether they want to support you or not. And so I think, whether you're talking about the design aspect, Ping's work in 3D printing, the ability to manufacture, what does it mean to have a factory? Every aspect of work, I think, is going to be redefined. And so that leads to the question then, is the workforce ready to have every aspect of jobs redefined, where they're infused with technology in almost every aspect of performing the job? And I think the conclusion many of us have come to is that the education systems as we know them are not really preparing people for this new model of work. I think we have an additional problem which just comes from globalization, which is already a side effect of technology. And as your own comments indicate, it's hard to know yet whether the ability to have the maker environment here, to have everything customized and personalized, will also somehow move offshore in a world of accelerated delivery, or whether it'll actually move closer, and that those costs will be subtracted out and replaced by the technological connectivity. But no matter how you look at it, there's no part of work as we know it that I think will be left untouched.
Yeah, I think one of the key ideas that I've been thinking about is that these network technologies, what they have in common is they're a new form of coordination. So when you look at Airbnb, there have always been B&Bs, and we had increasingly we did have some methods in the early days of the web, coming up to the present, where there were sites like HomeAway or even on TripAdvisor somebody would discover a location. But Airbnb takes it to a new hyper level of sort of a flow of product into the market, flow of customers into the market, much lower barriers to entry. In a similar way, Uber and other services like it, reinventing, casual, occasional transportation. And the thing that strikes me the most when I talk to Uber drivers is, first of all, they set their own hours. And they'll often say how much they like it better than being a cab driver. Many of them are former cab drivers, although many are also people who are entering the market because they have a new opportunity. And they're tending to serve markets that are underserved. But most importantly, the capacity of the system is so much greater because of the ease of the network. How many people here have used Uber? You guys know, it's like there are times when you will use it when you would never have called a cab because it was unreliable. And now you know how long it's going to take. You can follow the progress of the driver. The drivers can figure out in real time where the passengers who are looking for them actually are rather than driving around aimlessly hoping they find them. So we have a new method of network coordination that allows for a vast expansion of the market. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. We're going to be discovering new ways to reinvent industries through the addition of information. And coming back to Ping's comments, there's a guy named Liam Casey who runs PCH International company that is a sort of a supplier connector out of China for a lot of components and so on. They're a supplier of the maker movement. He has a great line about his business. He said, "We replace inventory with information." And that's kind of a theme throughout all of this. Anyway, I'm jumping ahead of things. I want to go over to John. And you're kind of the grandfather thinking about this space. And I'd love to have you just kind of take it wherever you want.
So I'll make a couple opening comments. First of all, I want to come back to your stuff, because if you were here to the prior session, it's interesting to see that Airbnb is not meant to replace hotels. It's meant to complement it in various ways. 3D printing is a complementary technology and capability that could be complementing more normal massive scale manufacturing. So we're looking at this new economy as things that are filling in interesting holes, and then see how each learns from each other in terms of the final morphing that's really happening. But I'm going to come back to the learning issue, because I think it's fair to say that the half-life of virtually any major skill today is about 5 years. Now think about that. If it's really 5 years, that means that most of the learning we're going to have to do is going to be done outside of the school system. It's going to be done in the workplace. It's going to be done in the social spaces. It's going to be done in the community libraries. It's going to be done in the communities, and so on and so forth. So your network coordination tools are the things that really allow us to take seriously how do you have kind of an honest approach toward lifelong learning, or a path of life learning. And I think the catch here is what really happened is we moved from thinking about teaching as imparting information to learning as a learner-centric point of view. And then we could actually go back to one of the greatest educators this century, last century's ever seen, John Dewey, who makes a major point that you actually learn by doing.
Yeah.
But the amazing thing is, today we have incredible tools for 10-year-olds, 20-year-olds, and even 70-year-olds to be able to go off and do things through these coordination structures. Mm-hmm. So don't laugh, but think about eHarmony, a dating software. The matching algorithms underlying eHarmony lets us match the best tutors for a particular kid has a particular kind of learning style in order to pick up a new skill. I'm watching this in Master Chess, where we have these kids that are now almost all having their coaches around the world. But they get hooked up by looking at the path of play, which has always been recorded now by the machines. Also, we were getting at earlier today. You can now do a kind of a data analytics and machine learning on that data, that we can actually get rid of standardized testing. We have a much better microscopic insight into how this person is working.
Yeah.
But we can also now couple this person's learning styles and misconceptions up to an ideal tutor someplace in the world for that particular next episode.
But even when it's not an in-person tutor and it's just, for example, a Khan Academy video, there is this ability to assess the learner. I went to look at a Khan Academy video. I was looking for something on statistics, and I was really surprised that they've come a long way. They started asking me a bunch of simple math questions before they even show me the video, figure out if I knew enough to actually be able to understand it. And so, we really are in this world where we're able to personalize a lot more, and where we're able to deliver things in real time. Now, YouTube, incredible resource. You did told a great opening story in your book with John Hagel a few years ago, The Power of Pull.
Surfing.
Yeah, about kids, both becoming, how they learned to surf by watching YouTube videos, how they increased their skills, but also how then they themselves became the subject the apprentices became the teachers through that same method, and that whole concept of user-centric, learner-centric.
And collaborative reflection on the behaviors.
Yeah.
It became very, very powerful. But think about it a moment. If in fact we're going to have to be relearning skills so much, that means whatever techniques we use have to honor what we already know. That immediately blows it out of most of the approaches to education.
Yeah.
I think this point John makes is super important, and actually the work that the Markle group has done, and actually some groups that I'm working on at the White House, are all concluding that this idea of matching things together, using the network to do it at the scale of the economy, is really going to be central to fixing this problem of wasting the talents and the investment in classic education that is evident today.
I think how it changes my own sense of self. I'm being honored for what I know, but having to be able to credential.
Right.
And so these systems can figure that out.
So getting these things, the other thing that's really interesting is that if you sit down and ask somebody, to describe themselves, they never do a very good job. And if you ask small businesses in particular to sit down and describe the employees they need, they never do a very good job. And yet, this instrumentation we're doing on everybody's life, whether it's while you're being educated or watching movies or writing or programming or whatever it is. I mean, the degree to which that is now instrumented gives us the basis of creating an understanding that's even better than what the people know themselves. And out of that should come a level of fit that we've just never known.
So let me ask a question that I think is really has an unknown answer, but that we should reflect on, and that is, to what extent is this good for the U.S. economy? What extent is it bad for the U.S. economy as we know it?
What's it?
This trend to networked work. So for example, when we think about, I want to find the best teacher and I can connect with them in real time over the network, will those teachers be here in the U.S. Teaching foreign students, or will they be foreign teachers teaching U.S. students? So it becomes a balance of trade issue. When we are looking at 3D printing, is it going to be sort of the relocalization of manufacturing, or is it going to be people build prototypes here and then they just get sent off to whatever low-cost destination? Anyway, what are some of the import-export implications? When you look at Odesk, which is sort of a platform that allows people to hire people for services like programming, I would say the majority of it is being imported into the U.S. It's services provided by people in the rest of the world to the U.S. And while in theory, U.S. could be exporting more services, I'm not sure that's actually the way it's going to happen.
I think, I'll just comment and Pin can say something. The issue, I think, is going to boil down to preparedness. Yeah. And that's why I think there's a sense of urgency and a lot of concern about this education. If the U.S. takes its assets, including its people, and it gets them prepared for this new world, then as these things emerge, they can say, look, we were there first, as the U.S. often was in some of the other technology-driven things in the last decades. And once you're camped out there, you have some operating advantage. If you're last, it's really hard. And so I think the great question for the United States right now is as a country, are we prepared to make the investments and deal with the disruptions that are going to be necessary to have the bulk of the population prepared for this, as opposed to only an elite, few. Yeah. And I think other countries are looking at the same opportunity, and they're making these decisions at the same time. And so I think it's a choice that the country has to make.
Ping, you were going to comment?
So I'm going to address it from 3D printing point of view. So 3D printing is a U.S. invention. We invented it, we improved it, and we democratized it. And now we are at a point of taking that to the social and economic impact. And 3D printing is actually really good for United States. And last week we had White House Maker Faire. The president goes out and talking about it. But the thing about 3D printing is that you're making product at the point of consumption. That's one. So you bring a lot of job back. And also, when you look at the 3D printing, it's not the printer, even though most of the good printers are made in USA today. The output of 3D printer is measured by service and design, not necessarily by the object that's being printed, because the complexity is free. Just like 2D printing, if you print one letter or you print a very beautiful design, it's the same button you push. And there's no manual intervention there. It is the design and the ideas and the local culture, the service that is customized, that's what creates a business. And that's why the business will be at the point of consumption. Now, we are leading this wave in the world, both in terms of technology, in terms of commercialization, even in terms of the government support, right? And I think that not only economically that 3D printing can bring jobs back, that's kind of like survival fundamental stage. But we are also putting the tools, tomorrow's tools, in today's kids' hand. We not only educate them as a critical thinker, we are also educate them as a capable makers. They no longer have their ideas in their head or on the computer as an abstract concept. They can now touch and feel of their ideas. And that is a really, really important for learning.
Yeah. I think you're also, though, bringing each of these sources of production closer to the customer. And so I think we'll kind of find in the next few years, we're creating much more customized products. Yep. In fact, products that actually speak to us more personally, or our community more personally, and so on and so forth. And I think we're moving away from the era of mass manufacturing.
Yeah, let me ask, though, another question that I think is I think a really important one for us to grapple with as we think about the future of this as an economic actor. And that is the fragmentation. You know, if you look at media, for example, you know, the internet and the World Wide Web in particular led to this massive democratization of the ability to publish, to reach people. But most of the people who publish on the World Wide Web don't make a living at it. There's a huge amount of creativity expressed, and there's certainly low barriers to entry, new people coming into the market, and some of them rising up and making new businesses that are very successful. You know, blog networks that turned into the Huffington Post, or, you know, in the Computer University TechCrunch, which later got bought by the Huffington Post. So there are many, many new kinds of businesses that arose on the internet, many of which became very large. But that democratization at the bottom was just kind of that early stage of everything bubbling up. And you know, same thing on YouTube. You see there's a relatively small number of people making really good incomes as YouTube creators, a lot of people making only a little bit of money. There's one version of the story that says that's actually the future. You know, people are going to have multiple streams of income. Part of what Brian was describing in his talk on Airbnb was this notion of people saying, you know, thank you, back in 2008, because of you, I was able to keep my house. You know, so it's incremental income that would let them, you know, keep their home. Or, you know, as I said, when I was taking Uber, I talk with the driver, and, you know, often they have a story of like, this is not my main job. It's something I can fill in with. I can get additional income. I have a very personal story of that. A young friend of mine who had an ambition to become a public defender, a wonderful, socially valuable career, but it was very hard for him to get there. He didn't actually pass the bar the first couple of times, and so he had this head of halfway house jobs in the system, and a lot of debt from law school. And he was originally playing poker to make ends meet, and then, you know, Lyft came along, and he was able to become a driver. You know, he now has a full-time job as a public defender, but he was able to kind of piece together his career because he had these alternate sources of income that not only were good income, but were under his control, as opposed to, you have to have a job at these hours, and, you know, I'm sitting there and I'm waiting for the job to come to me and I don't match. You know, I do think there's an important piece of this where it really is self-directed and self-controlled, but does it in the end add up to the kind of economy that we took for granted for so many years? And any thoughts on that?
I mean, this is
Or
unfortunately.
is it a better economy? It could be better. You know?
Yeah, I was going to say,
Takes that.
this is a major topic. I just want to kind of suggest that the 20th century was defined almost totally by looking at financial capital. We're now moving into a world where financial capital and social capital have to be combined.
Yeah.
And so there's a sense, is my life more meaningful in this new way? Have I constructed a new, better sense of, a more robust sense of identity? Am I engaged more in what's happening? And am I capable of actually having a more sustainable life by not needing so much stuff because I can use Uber when I want? Yeah. And so I think we're going to move into a new set of fixed points. And we don't really quite understand what those types of trade-offs are going to be. And I think it's going to be very varied depending on...
Yeah, I think there are a lot of choices. Is a choose your own adventure here because, you know, what a lot of people don't realize is the 20th century economy of, you know, well-paying middle-class jobs, you know, at companies where you had a job for life, you know, has really broken down, and we now have increasing returns to capital, and we say, well, all these are low-paid service jobs. That's actually a social compact. You know, it's how much do companies want to pay their employees? And at some point, I think as Nick Hanauer has pointed out really successfully recently, you know, ultimately companies depend on having customers. Henry Ford, you know, realized that he had to pay people enough so they could buy his product. And we knew that for a long time, and I think we've forgotten it. You know, we heard in the marketplace session on this stage last night how, you know, 40% of Walmart employees are on public assistance because they're not paid enough to live. And Walmart is then the primary recipient of food stamp dollars spent on food. You know, that's unsustainable, you know, and it's a breakdown of a social compact. This is a different part of the culture of capital. But I think the point you're making is also super critical, which is, you know, once people say, well, actually, I didn't really need to buy that new thing because I don't have enough money for it anyway, you know, and I get much more satisfaction by making something or spending time with my friends or doing this creative thing that I'm exchanging with someone else. That economy starts to break down for the big employers as well because they don't have their customers who are as eager to buy their product. So I think we're looking at a very, very different kind of economy, and I think it's going to, different people are going to wake up at different points to the fact that the rules are different.
I think things will rebalance the way you're talking about, but you know, when over the next few decades while this is happening and the planet gets to about 9 billion people.
Yeah, that's why we need this.
Right, occupy Mars. And you know, my experience in trying to hire people to do research and development type work has led me to believe at least that the population is not uniformly willing to take risks. That, you know, a relatively small percentage of the population seem to be genetically predisposed to taking risk in what they do. And the rest of the people are uncomfortable with it. And I worry, you know, you said the last session said, oh, you know, we're going to have 100 million entrepreneurs around the world. Well, that's great, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to the number of jobs that are going to be required for people to just sustain life. And so these points may be true. People will maybe choose to rebalance their lives in terms of what their expectations are. But we're talking about a lot of mouths to feed on a planetary basis, and certainly even in this country. And I think that there's some bigger problems just in terms of the makeup of people and their comfort with dealing with these things that are going to make it hard to get the whole population, or at least the center of the distribution, to be comfortable of making it all up as they go.
I totally agree with that. I don't think this is going to be this magic bullet that will sort of solve our jobs problem. I think that what will solve our jobs problem, i.e. there are not enough jobs, are that we find things that really need doing and we suddenly wake up and go, oh, whoa, we have been living on borrowed time around climate change. We've been living on borrowed time around you know, water. We've been living on borrowed time around food. We need to rebuild our infrastructure. Oh, crap. You know, we got to get on it, and there's going to be a lot of work that's going to drive a lot of jobs because we suddenly realize we have been just deferring a whole lot of stuff that really needs doing.
But I think also
the economy has to pay for all that.
Yeah.
You know, and I think if you actually, you know, we tend to ask what are the skills that are going to be important to learn in the future.
Yeah.
I like to turn around that question and ask, how do we create the workspace or the learning space so that learning, every change that happens becomes an adventure
Yeah.
as opposed to a task. And so we're in kind of this explorer mode. And I think that this actually turns out to kind of change our own perspectives of each one of us. And I really think, we can't overlook this, because I think the changes are huge, but they're often invisible because they have almost what it was a social substrate. So look at your watch.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what you didn't talk about the Pebble watch is the Pebble watch was initially prototyped in a dojo, martial arts, hacker community in Mountain View, where hundreds of kids come together, live, spend a small amount of money on evenings after their regular jobs to get together and to learn and experiment and build with each other. It is a fundamental learning, building together space. Pinterest came out of the same thing. They got the idea finally, and then they took it through Y Combinator, and then used Kickstarter to raise the monies. So your story picks up at the end.
Yeah.
My story picks up at the very beginning.
Yeah.
Those are learning communities where these kids say, I'm going to create the spaces for me to pick up the skills that I did not get coming out of, by the way, MIT and the best technical schools, because this game is changing so fast. And so they build their own communities. And it's kind of interesting, if you know much about martial arts, to think, what's the relationship between martial arts and becoming actually knowing hacking in our sense of the word, not cyber theft. Yeah. And there's a certain sense of how do you learn to be with the material? How do you kind of merge with that? That's what these kids are learning. It's an amazing thing to watch.
This is an interesting thing I just want to bring up too. This is coming back to away from learning to the other shape of the economy. I'm thinking about CrossFit. How many people here know about CrossFit? It's this fitness craze. But the guy who developed it, it came to mind when you were talking about the dojo. The original development of this. Literally, this guy, former gymnast who'd kind of been looking for the perfect workout. And his original gym was under a highway overpass because he just found some crazy people who wanted to try out this super intense workout with him. And but what's really, really interesting is the way that CrossFit has grown. He didn't build the huge network of CrossFit-owned enterprises. He actually went online. He put his workouts online. He's licensed it very generously. And he's created quite a huge industry of which he only owns a small part. And there's sort of interesting thing here about the way that people are creating platforms that create value for a lot of other people. And that's a different way of doing the economy than this model where we're going to try to get as big as possible and own it all, own as much as possible of it all.
I want to make a point on top of this network or collective learning. One of the things that I observed is that once we have the networked world, it's the first time in human history that we can extend our mental self. Right. We have always extended our physical self. We build airplane to fly, we build spreadsheet to remember more numbers than we can. But now 1 million people can work on the same idea, and they learn from each other. Machine and human learn from each other too. So you can very rapidly come up with ideas that even the single most expert in the field could not come up with. And that is really interesting and very, very interesting for the younger generation because they're so used to have that. Yeah. The other thing I want to talk about are the problem we're solving, not just the ideas we have, but the problem we're solving. Mark, can you play the second video? Yeah, so he's going to play a video. So this is this video is about Amanda. She's paraplegic, so she's paralyzed waist down. And the collaboration between mechanical engineer, robotist, and 3D printing people were able to give her leg back, and she can walk again. And this is not done by a medical doctor. Okay, imagine that. From now on, ever in your life, you don't have to worry about you can never walk again because you will always be able to walk. And that's what the technology can do for us as a human. And this is what collective wisdom did with technology and understanding of human and collective ideas to create something like this.
That's a beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful story. I mean,
It really is. And it also really highlights the point that often when you democratize technology, you'll have people going after problems that don't seem big enough for a big company to make the profits they require. Now, those things often become huge businesses after somebody proves it out, but there's that experimentation layer that becomes so much more permeable. I wanted to actually open it up now to questions from the audience. So do we have a microphone that's going around? All right, over here, so raise your hands and if you have questions, and if you don't, we'll just keep going. But any hands out here? Although,
Hi. Can you hear me?
yes.
Ping, I'm curious, can you elaborate more on your 30-year history that it took to get from the beginning of the 3D printing and where it is today?
Yeah, so interestingly, if you look at the fundamental technology that have a breakthrough and eventually being democratized, the average time is 28 years. So it's not like people think there's an overnight success. So for 3D printing, for the first 25 years is primarily technology development. It's in the special people's hand. It's being used by special engineers. And it's only in the last 5 years that has been getting into the consumer hand, the makers movement, the internet availability to communicate with those machines, and the availability of the cheaper and variety of material, which all come together to make this happen. So in the last 5 years is what people hear about 3D printing. Before that, most people have never heard about the technology.
Philip? Oh, sorry, you have something else here?
Hi, Cindy Beniski. So I saw the legs, which are great. That's a good use, and your shawl is beautiful. But what if somebody wants to print a gun?
It's been done.
I always know this question is going to come up. So those are what's called unintended consequences, right? So any technology that's out there will be used for some unintended consequences. I would like to say gun doesn't shoot, it's people shoot, so it's always good against evil. I would also say that whenever you have something like this happen, which is great because then people will innovate to solve that problem. It is certainly harder to print a gun than buy a gun. And it's a whole lot easier to trace a printed gun than trace it in the pawn shop where you buy the gun. So the technology can help you to identify. There's pattern recognition. So if you're going to print a gun on the machine, we know, right? Much better than you buy a gun in some obscure places.
Philip?
Yes, John, you made a brief comment where you said that production was moving closer to the consumer, was becoming more customized, and then you said the sentence, we were moving away from mass manufacturing.
Right.
And I wanted to give the panel a chance to develop that idea some more. Let's talk about how far that can go. That is, I think the perception now is we still have basically the things we have are still mainly made by factories. And then there's this niche stuff on the side, and that's being made by these new technologies. And maybe there are a few more niche things. The question for you is, how far can this go? Can this go to the point that all sorts of things, the clothes you buy at a retail store, bespoke tailoring will be part of every clothing store because they'll be making bespoke garments for you on site. Housing, hardware. Basically, talk a little bit about how far can this go, because then you really are talking about deep disruption of the whole structure of an industrial economy.
I mean, as you can imagine, it's a highly controversial topic that I don't think we have any real understanding of how it's going to be unfold. But let me give you a couple of tiny examples. I mean, one of the most first uses of 3D printing in mass manufacturing is actually we print the molds as a prototype, and then those molds get put into a kind of a platform scheme that produces those. So suddenly you now have a combination, a little bit like the Airbnb story. You got some localizations going on here, and then the molds get shipped off someplace else to be produced, okay? So the bridge of what happens where becomes a little bit less clear. Okay? Now, if you look at like local motors, now
So
the whole...
explain what local motors is.
Oh, local motors is, well, the one I know is in Arizona, is being spread out several other places. It's a place to, let's say, how do we make very small runs on vehicles that we have collaboratively designed instead of people? It's kind of like Quirky on steroids for cars. Probably both people offended by that, Quirky locomotives, but that's kind of the idea. You go down there, and these are pretty damn serious cars, but they've been very personalized to the kind of car that I really want for my particular use, depending on what kind of off-road traveling I'm doing and so on and so forth. So all of a sudden, I can now start to build I can have built for me just the kind of vehicle I want. Same with the shoes. Okay, and we got into this, why I got into 3D printing is I happen to have orthotic braces. Try to put orthotics into sandals. Okay, by the way, that's non-trivial. One of the first uses of some of this 3D printing is now we can print orthotics that fit directly into the shoes or the sandals that we want, and build that as a now top layer on the standardized produced bottom layer. So we're just seeing that this isn't a pure tone game.
Yeah.
This is a hybrid game.
The one thing I will say that I think is really worth thinking about, we can get some lessons from sort of industries that used to be manufacturing industries and are no longer primarily manufacturing industries. For example, my industry, publishing, it's increasingly digital, so it follows digital rules. It used to be all publishers had a printer, then they outsourced to the printer, and now they're kind of, basically a big publisher is really, from a manufacturing point of view, is really on the same level playing field as a self-publisher. Partly you think, oh wow, that means everybody is equal, but it isn't actually the case. The concentration of power shifts. It shifts from publishers to Amazon, or in music, from the music publishers to Apple. And so you have kind of some interesting things that I think we'll also see where there are new points of leverage for people to, the things that will become hard or scarce resources that will allow you to gain an outsized share of the pie will be different. It doesn't necessarily mean, though, that everything will be democratized. It's a little different angle than the will it be local or remote, but I think it is important not to get too starry-eyed about new technologies when they come in, because, as they say, the more it changes, the more it stays the same.
Well, I want to make it a little bit more real. How many of you knows Invisalign creating, the orthodontics application, right? So Invisalign uses 3D printing to print the mold, but they don't outsource it. They print it in the United States. Right. And their manufacturing side is about 7 times of this wrong. And they're making 17 million individualized aligners every year. So we're not talking about 10,000, 20,000. It's not tchotchkes. It's customized, personalized medical devices, right? Let me talk about hearing aid industry. You know that there are hearing aids sits inside of the ear. That it's called in-the-ear canal hearing aid. It got very popular since the mobile phone started, because you don't want that behind-the-ear hearing aid. That industry was 100% manual. They used to put a silicone in your ear, manually cut it into a shape that fits your ear canal, make the injection molding for the plastic housing, and then, so long story short, the most experienced hearing aid maker can make 8 of them a day, and they sell for a couple of thousand a pair. Now it's completely digital, and what's printed out the customer shell is the end product from the printer. Worldwide, they make 3 million custom-made hearing aid a year today. And a high school dropout who's very good with video gaming can make 500 a day and make them better than an expert, because there's no variation on human skill, right? It would just be fit perfectly. So that's, again, you have scale. In those two are medical devices.
Same with crowns.
Same as a bridge and crowns and tooth implant. Now let's talk about aerospace. Can you play the first video? I'm going to have Jeff email to talk about what they are doing. So this is a heavy industry.
A shape of a turbine blade and where the holes go and what the coating is, that might be the difference in 1 or 2 points of fuel burn in the way a jet engine works, and that's billions of dollars for our customers in terms of performance. Now, the way that's made today is kind of subtractive, right? You get a block of something, and you weld it, and you arc it, and you take the scrap, and it goes someplace, and that's how you make those parts today. And 3D printing allows you to make that product right the first time. It allows you to make it from the core up, so you basically don't have as much waste. The tooling's cheaper, the cycle time's faster, and that is the holy grail.
Yeah, that whole point about the cycle time being faster is super critical because it allows you to try more experiments.
I just add one thing to Phil's question. Some things that are mass produced today, you pay a tax on them because of the transportation. And so you could say, hey, if you could print them locally or closer to consumption, you can recover that, and therefore it may offset any additional costs of producing it locally or in smaller volumes. In the case that Ping cited, the personalization becomes an almost essential feature, and therefore building things this way are good. When you get into the bespoke tailoring question, I think people are going to find that there's still going to be a spectrum of people who are willing to pay a premium for personalization, and people who are willing to forsake some personalization in order to get the lowest possible price. And so I think it's hard to predict that it would all just shift one direction or the other. I also think that there are whole categories of things that we never even thought about. I mean, the medical devices are one. People are now talking about 3D printing foods. So I think that part of the novelty here is not going to be just can we redo the old things the new way, but once you have this new infrastructure in place, are there a set of things that you can do that just weren't feasible before that have appeal to people? And whether it's custom meals, you look at all the people who worry about their diet, and you pick up today, you pick up every food and you have to read the labels and you say, hey, is this the right blend for me or not? What if you basically said, hey, most of the things that I eat, because most people don't have that much variety in their life, I just have my 3D food printer on the counter, I put in my menu and the thing basically rebalances, everything I eat so that the nutrition calculation is done for you. It's all embedded in the stuff.
For that matter, with sensors, we may really be able to say not just what do you like, but what do you need.
But what do I need?
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm just saying, each of these represents an advance that is not just a redo of the old way. I mean, there's the old adage, whenever there's some new thing invented, the first thing people do is they do the old thing the new way. Yeah. Oh. And only then do they realize that was really stupid. Why aren't I doing something completely different? And I think that what's missing here, and the reason I get excited about the future is, with the new class of computing, we'll produce new kinds of materials. With 3D printing, which will be in both the organics and the inorganics, as well as the metals. And with all of that, everything we have can be reinvented. And then you have to ask yourself, what's the economics of that, and how do you prepare people to participate in the economy of the reinvented everything? And to me, that's why I'm not sort of doom and gloom about this stuff. I just think that you have to realize the degree to which the transformation is possible and get prepared for it.
Yeah, there'll be huge disruption, but also huge opportunity.
Right, but I'm saying most of the discussion, even if you look at our panel, tends to talk about disrupting the things we already do. I could almost say, hey, look, that's all great. We'll just do that, the way we do it. Now I just want to invent a whole new class of things that are done the new way, and then we'll let those things compete with the old things, and
Yeah.
people can
Well,
make.
the other thing that I think
have
is
their
super
choice.
interesting too is there's often trade-offs. When you do reinvent things, you perhaps change the dynamics. For example, Google has talked about the self-driving car as a potential replacement for not just for the commuter car, but also, hey, would this be a better way to do long-distance transportation? A long fleet of self-driving cars with just the right capacity, instead of sinking billions of dollars, which you have to do over decades to build the high-speed rail line. Whether those kinds of things will actually play out or not, we don't know. But you may have trade-offs between things that used to be capital-intensive and they become less so. They become more ad hoc. So they become operational expenses, and those are fundamental structural changes in the economy when you have those kinds of things happen.
The one thing I just think
questions
people
out here.
got to focus on
Okay.
is
We
it's
got
got to be something that is for a huge part of the population.
But
I want to
Let me-
just make sure we don't just keep talking among ourselves. Are there anybody other questions from the audience?
Okay,
All right.
John?
Oh wait, here's one.
Oh.
Here we go.
Where do these 3D printers exist? Are they in my home? If I want a chicken dinner, I push the button and it creates a chicken dinner or a lovely scarf. Where are they located?
Well, they're not only going to be in your home, you're also going to decide which room you're going to put those in, right? So if it's a food printer, it's probably going to be in your kitchen. And I believe food printer is probably going to be the first one to really democratize it, the 3D printing. But you can have it in your garage to do repairs. Today, they exist still in a niche space. Industrial space, there's a lot of them. Then there's makers who have them. General consumers, not quite yet. Schools, there's a lot of them in the schools. But I think in the future, you will be deciding which room you want to put your 3D printer.
Yeah, one thing that's super important to realize about 3D printers is they're really only one aspect of a much broader phenomenon that you could call digital manufacturing. Carl Bass, who's the CEO of Autodesk, on the side is a woodworker. He does this for fun. And he told me, a few years back, one of the things that changed was that the design model went from, you imagine something in your head, you draw a picture of it, you kind of get it into some kind of format that it can be manufactured to, you see something interesting in the world and you scan it. He gave me two examples. He said, look, I had this chair and I always wanted to make the arms in the shape of this beautiful, I think some kind of fish skeleton he'd found on the beach. He said, now I can. I scanned it, and then I was able just to make it. The other one, he said, when we were renovating our new showcase building in San Francisco, before we put in any of the fittings, we scanned the room. So when we built all the fittings, they fit exactly. So the changes in workflow in manufacturing, or there's a huge amount of innovation in materials. My son-in-law, who's been a speaker here at Aspen, is an inventor, and he's doing things that are like finding creative new uses for materials where you can understand the constraints of various kinds of materials, and it's actually in the design program that helps you figure out, well, that's the right material for this job, and we can use less material than we thought. He said one of the secrets to his business is replacing materials with math. A number of his inventions have to do with just understanding the properties of materials and say, well, we can manufacture something that's very, very different.
Just a few of the things that just went by quickly I think are worth dwelling on. Food. Just think, if some significant percentage of preparing every meal in the future was done this way, it would be a revolution. Think about spare parts. The world is chock full of warehouses full of spare parts. And one of the big questions is, well, how can you still get a part for a thing that's valuable to you, that's more than 10 years old? Probably not. Well, you could if you could print your own, all right? If you go catalog shopping today, today you're fulfilled, by the UPS truck showing up, but, it still can't be very customized. There's no reason you couldn't shop for, things for decorating in your home. But now you're no longer confined to exactly the size or shape. You say, well, I kind of like that one, but my wall is a ½ an inch narrower. Well, there's no reason you can't say, fine, you know, print me one here in the garage, ½ an inch narrower, and I'd rather mine be purple instead of pink. All those things essentially, you know, are possible in this kind of new environment. And I think people have to think, whether it's in the home or the workplace, it's just going to be radically different.
Okay, we're out of time, but John is asking for a little bit more. And this is the customization of the panel as demonstrated here in Aspen. You saw it here first.
And you will see it again. We keep talking about most of our fascinations on products and technologies. If you really look what's happening, the speed of change is accelerating. One of the questions is, how do we build new institutional architectures that are capable of changing fast enough? How do we rethink what HR is? How do we rethink what organizational routines are? How do you get scale without mass if agility and change really does matter? And so I just want us to kind of pause as we leave and realize that I was on a panel some time ago. I asked the question, I know why they put me on, like you, what is the invention that has led to the greatest creation of wealth in the last 200 years? And I knew they wanted me to say microprocessor. And I said, no, limited liability corporation. The LLC has produced more wealth than anything else. That's an institutional innovation. We're going to see opportunities to kind of create brand new types of institutions. By the way, you know, Airbnb is a tiny step toward that.
Yeah.
But fundamentally new types of institutions. So we take our major corporations today, they themselves are going to have to morph in ways that actually get scale without mass. And that's more than just a question of printing.
Yeah. All right. On that note, we'll end. Go forth and invent the future. Thank you.